Welcome back, everyone. Next up, we have Kintara Therapeutics. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol KTRA. And Kintara Therapeutics is dedicated to the development of novel cancer therapies for patients who are failing or resistant to current treatment regimens. Please welcome President and CEO Robert Hoffman. Nice to see you, Robert.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Before I begin, I'd like to point out that I'll be making numerous forward-looking statements during this presentation. Actual results may differ, so please refer to the risk factors on file with the SEC. As Anna mentioned, I'm President and CEO. I've been CEO for about 2 years now. I'm really excited for the couple programs we have ongoing currently. The first one, and the one arguably everyone's looking forward to, is VAL-83, which is a first-in-class small molecule with a unique mechanism of action. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes here. We are in a pivotal trial. It's through the GBM Agile International Registrational Study, and we're in all 3 patient subtypes for glioblastoma, newly diagnosed methylated, unmethylated, as well as recurrent disease. We initiated the trial in January 21, and we're in approximately 45 different clinical sites. You'll see in a few slides here, it's the best of the best in US in particular of the sites. As I mentioned, we're in the 3 different patient subtypes, but really importantly is we have a very large safety database, about approximately 1,200 patients prior to joining the study, which gives us a lot of confidence in the safety profile. Now we just got to prove the efficacy. Our second program, REM-001, it's a second generation photodynamic therapy program. We recently, and I'm so excited that we were able to get this, a National Institutes of Health award grant. We got that in June of 23. We did pause this program for financial reasons, and we're up and running again, and I'm hoping to announce when we get that first patient in the study. It is a 15-patient study, and the market opportunity is pretty significant, about a $500 million market opportunity. The indication is cutaneous metastatic breast cancer. As I mentioned, though, it is a platform type program with REM-001. So we'll look to do this 15-patient study and then go from there. But it is, we believe, after the 15-patient study, phase 3 ready. Kind of the hallmark of both our programs is the safety profile. 1,100 patients have been studied prior to this 15-patient study. And then we have multiple follow-on indications. The one that we're really most excited about is VAL-83 for ovarian cancer. We do have orphan drug designation in that, and the interest would be around a VAL-83 in combination with a PARP inhibitor. You can see at the top the drug designations that we do have. One of the programs I started when becoming CEO back in November of 21 was thinking about how we can have a better relationship with the FDA. And one of that was to look at designations that we don't currently have. So since I started, we received fast track designation in newly diagnosed unmethylated, as well as orphan drug in cutaneous metastatic breast cancer, and one other one there that I'm failing to remember right now. But we've received 3 since I started here. That will allow us to have more interactions with the FDA, assuming we get good data, hopefully around near the end of this year. That we can start those discussions earlier and have them ongoing. So just taking a step back and looking at the glioblastoma or GBM opportunity, the last drug was approved in 1999. So there's clearly an unmet medical need. Sadly, 5% of patients live greater than 5 years, so it's effectively a death sentence. As I mentioned, the market opportunity is about $1 billion. That should grow to $1.4 billion in 2027. You can see the incidences in the US and EU. It's interesting. I was just in China, and the incident rate in China is actually higher and growing, and we're not sure why. There's no really cause and effect for glioblastoma, but it's sad to see that in China in particular that the incidence rate is growing. I mentioned that we're currently in this platform study, GBM Agile, and I'll talk a little bit more about the design of the study, which is really innovative. But they work very closely with the FDA, so there's a strong endorsement from the FDA with this study. And I mentioned we're in all 3 patient subtypes. So looking at the mechanism of action, I always kind of skip this slide and go to the next slide, which is kind of the verbiage related to that. We are a bifunctional alkylating agent versus the current standard of care, which is temozolomide or TMZ, is monofunctional. We induce DNA interstrand crosslinks, which TMZ does not. And then we induce a double-strand DNA break, which temozolomide only produces a single strand and can actually repair it, which ours is lethal to the tumor cells. It's administered IV, which is very reproducible and helpful with pharmacokinetics. And I think most importantly, it achieves a brain concentration level that is 20% higher than corresponding plasma levels. So it's really important that it does cross the blood-brain barrier. You know, for a brain tumor, that's really important. You would think that all drugs that target brain tumors do, but a lot of them actually don't. And you can see comparing that to TMZ, a little bit gets in, but the brain concentrations are 80% lower than the peak plasma levels. So this is the data here that we did in our phase 2, which really got us into this GBM Agile study, which I'll talk about in the next slide or so. And you can see the gold standard is overall survival. So looking at newly diagnosed first line at Sun Yat-sen University Cancer Center, we achieve a median overall survival of 19.1 months, and then at MD Anderson, 16.5 months versus the current standard of care of roughly 14 months. And then separately, recurrent patients, we saw an overall survival of 8 months versus 7.2 months. That may not sound like a lot on the recurrent side, but sadly, a lot of patients can't tolerate lomustine. There's lots of contraindications. So we believe, going back to our safety profile, that gives us an advantage in the recurrent patient population as well. So this is the GBM Agile study that I was talking about. It was founded back in 2017, I should say GCAR, Global Coalition for Adaptive Research, who runs the study. About 130 key opinion leaders got together and said there's some significant unmet medical needs in the pharmaceutical industry or in diseases in general. And we got to think about how we can better get drugs to the marketplace or at least prove their efficacy. And so they worked very closely with the FDA to come up with a master protocol such that anytime a new company comes into the clinical trial, it's just a protocol amendment. A lot of these individuals were in the I-SPY platform, which was in breast cancer. There's about 18 product candidates from different companies that went into that clinical trial, and they got 3 accelerated approvals out of it. So as I mentioned, GBM, or the GCAR study, GBM Agile, is an international effort. I mentioned the master protocol. Primary endpoint, again, which is the gold standard, is overall survival. In final patient analysis, 12 months after that last patient is randomized. So as I mentioned, we're looking at newly diagnosed methylated, unmethylated, as well as recurrent. Looking at the bottom there, you can see how quickly actually this study moves along. We initiated the study back in January of 21. Fast forward to March of 23, we're in 43 different clinical sites. And again, you'll see in a minute the high quality of clinical sites that we have. Top line data before the end of this year. So I was speaking to a company who is in phase 2 clinical trials. They were testing one patient subtype, and it was going to take them 6 years. So in a minute here, you'll see actually this slide here, the benefits of being in this clinical trial. So as I mentioned, there's different companies in this study. We all share the control group. So that's really important from a building a really nice database to present to the FDA for having lots of people on the control group. But also from a financial perspective, because we share it, it's less expensive financially. So the cost of the study overall, about $25 million. If we were to do this on our own, it'd be $25 million per each subtype, or about $75 million. Then I get back to that timeline from that other company I was talking about. This has only taken us 3 years. Looking at the quote there from the FDA, I'll just read it. Platform trials can accelerate the time from discovery in the laboratory to implementation in the clinic. GBM Agile will raise the bar for all clinical trials. That was from Janet Woodcock, very senior individual at the FDA. So really important to have that FDA buy-in. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see the high quality of the clinical sites that we have across the US in particular. Just to name a few: Henry Ford, MD Anderson, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Duke University. And as I mentioned, just the speed at getting these clinics up and running. A little bit about my background: I was at Arena Pharmaceuticals for 17 years. We had a obesity study that was ongoing, and it took us 18 months from start to finish to get Duke University in that clinical trial. And again, going back to the speed here, it's just amazing. Another thing that's really important about having these really high prescribing sites is, assuming we get good data and ultimately approval, they're going to have a lot of familiarity with Validity-3, which will help significantly with the commercial launch from that perspective. So we're just really thrilled to work with these high quality sites across the US, Canada, and the world. I have a world-class scientific advisory board on the Validity-3 side. Dr. John DeGroot was formerly at MD Anderson, is now at UCSF. He's the PI for the Validity-3 GBM Agile study. I also have Dr. David Reardon, who's affiliated with Dana-Farber, but also Harvard Medical, and Nicholas Bukowski, who's at UCF Medical Center. I had another individual on there, and I moved Nicholas over to the middle there, who is Timothy Clousey. He's actually on the board of the GBM Agile study. He rolled off recently because he thought it would, given that we're coming up on data soon, it'd be good to show that there's really no conflict of interest. But he heads up UCLA Medical in the brain cancer department. So really world-class for a small company like us. So just to summarize, we're expecting clinical data before the end of this year. The patient enrollment has been much quicker than anticipated, about 3 to 4 times quicker than any traditional GBM Agile study. And we screened, I should say GBM Agile has screened about approximately 1,300 patients across all different arms of the study. And as I mentioned, we're in all 3 patient subtypes. So that gives us multiple shots on goal as well. Moving to our other program, REM-001, it is a platform that we're looking at. It's a 2nd-generation photodynamic cancer therapy. The lead indication that we have is cutaneous metastatic breast cancer, or CMBC, which is an unmet medical need for sure. About 40,000 patients in the US, and I mentioned the market opportunity for us. The clinical aspects are a highly morbid form of breast cancer. There's a lot of bleeding, a lot of malodorous smells, and sadly, there's a lot of suicidality and narcotics for pain control. And the current medications are really limited in that regard. The take home from this, how it works is on day 0, the drug is injected. On day 1, a light source is it's shined onto the lesion. And then what happens is the oxygen in the cell is catalyzed, and it promotes healing. And proof of that is across different phase 2, phase 3 studies that were previously performed, we saw an 80% complete response rate across almost 700 available lesions. So we're really excited about that. And again, the safety database is really robust, that we just got to prove the efficacy in this 15-patient study and then move on to a phase 3 clinical trial. So as I mentioned, it's phase 3 ready. We're utilizing that National Institutes of Health to move this program forward. It was a $2 million grant. The overall cost of study is about $3 million. We think with lowering the dose from 1.2 milligrams to 0.8 milligrams in this 15-patient study, we can promote faster healing and have less sensitivity involved in it. And then some expansion opportunities for both programs. I think I mentioned this already, but the one we're most excited about is ovarian cancer in combination with a PARP inhibitor. We do have some indications of interest from pharmaceutical companies with their PARP inhibitors. And then the other one on REM-001 side is Nevis syndrome, which we have orphan drug designation. Just in terms of barriers to competition, we do have a very robust patent strategy. We do have orphan drug in the US EU for Validity-3, 14 different patent families, and patent expires range from 2031 to 2038, and very similar for REM-001 in terms of barriers to competition. Just in terms of our milestones, we've been very successful laying out our milestones and achieving those particular milestones. just going back to the fourth quarter 22, we achieved fast track designation from the FDA in REM-001 and CMBC patients, orphan drug designation for VAL83 in DIPG, which is a pediatric indication, which we're interested in studying VAL83 in. I mentioned the grant that we have for REM-001 and CMBC. We're looking at other similar type grants, not only for REM-001, but for VAL83. One of the interesting things that we have ongoing is MD Anderson has a very large expanded access, which used to be known as compassionate use, about 40 patients in that. And we published some data through posters, really interesting data around an ependymoma case, which is a rare brain tumor. So we're interested in a grant from that as well that we have ongoing discussions. But again, I think the most important thing by the end of this year, VAL83, we're expecting top-line data for that study in glioblastoma patients. We have a very seasoned, small but seasoned leadership team. Again, a little bit about me, 17 years at Arena Pharmaceuticals, part of the startup management team there, took the company public, a CFO for about 10 years there, raised $1.2 million, was kind of the financial backing for a couple of transactions we did with Merck, J&J, and others. Had some manufacturing experience. I was a managing director of our Swiss manufacturing facility, flew over there 4 times a year for 5 or 6 years. Greg Johnson has lots of pharmaceutical experience, very relevant. And then Dennis Brown is a founder of the company, a CSO, lots of experience and invaluable to the company. These are investment highlights. I think I've covered them all already, but I'm happy, Anna, to open it up to your questions if you have any.
Great job, Robert. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on the commercialization of VAL083.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that question. So we do have lots of pharmaceutical companies that are interested in the US market in particular, but then Japan and other parts of Asia that there's interest in particular. So I do have a term sheet on my desk, draft term sheet, that if we get good data, we're off to the races for VAL83 in the US. I'm really excited about that. I think that, again, assuming good data, we could really leverage not only from a commercial perspective, but from a regulatory perspective to work closely with the FDA to get this over the finish line with this pharmaceutical company in particular, regulatory expertise that they have. So that's kind of the thought process there. No need to reinvent the wheel. I think other companies can do it better than we can. And then I'll look regionally to partner the drug. Again, for some reason, lots of partnership discussions in Japan, Asia in particular, but more recently in Europe.
And can you talk about what your current cash runway is?
Yeah, so I'll just say we have enough money to get to data before the end of the year. I am looking at other ways to bolster that cash position. Some of them may be debt deals or otherwise. I do want to have a cushion because data can be delayed for one reason or another, and I just hate to be in a position where I run out of money before I get to data. Other thing I'm thinking about is maybe an ATM or different things like that. I just did get June 30th additional shares authorized, which will be really helpful to raise money in the future, hopefully upon good data.
Now, also, I see that you have an equity line of credit in place with Lincoln Park. So talk about your plans to utilize this. Yeah,
good. Thank you for reminding me. We do have an equity line of credit in place that we put in place August of last year. We used $2 million of the $20 million. We do need shareholder approval for the additional $18 million. So I expect to file a special meeting request, which should take place in the end of September to get approval for that additional $18 million. That is through Lincoln Park, which is really the gold standard for any equity line of credit you use, and that would be available to us. So that would be another kind of tool in my toolbox, pending good data to utilize and raise money to get this over the finish line.
Perfect. And can you talk about how the REM-001 grant will work?
Yeah, so there is some information on that I do want to explain. So it is earmarked towards REM-001, and how it works is we'll expend money and then turn around, petition the Small Business Administration who administers the study, I should say the grant process, and within 3 days they'll actually reimburse us for that. So I think some people were thinking that there'd be a large bolus of money. That's not the case. We'll expend the money and turn around and get reimbursed in that. So again, I'm really thrilled to have that in place. $2 million in non-dilutive money, don't have to pay it back ever. Really jumpstarts the program to have 2 ongoing programs by the time we get the data.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations on all this. Thank you so much for joining us on the conference, and we'd love to have you back in the future with some updates.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the invite.
All right. Thank you so much, Robert. Okay, everyone, stay with us. We'll be right back with our next presenter.